In the last episode of The Time Compass,
The Chinese saw that the world was made up of very different things, and that each thing had its opposite. They began to think of nature as something in balance, a harmony of different opposing forces. So if it was cold in one place, it was because it was hot in another. If the earth existed, it was because air existed too. If the sun shone during the day, it was the moon that ruled at night. Men had male energy, women had female energy. Opposite, but in balance. These observations about the nature that surrounded them is the basis of a philosophy. They used this philosophy to build a great civilization that has lasted for thousands and thousands of years. The Time Compass.
Ancient China, Part 2. In ancient China, people believed the universe was made up of many opposing forces that were in balance. The same was true for people. If a person was feeling sick or pain, then it was because they had an imbalance of forces in their body. They were out of harmony with the universe. Traditional Chinese medicine is a science that aims to take people back to this state of balance and harmony with nature. For example, the head relates to the sky. The feet relate to the earth. The arms and legs relate to the 4 seasons. Breathing is the wind and blood is rain. To remain healthy, all these forces have to exist together in harmony. To do this, doctors often use medicines made of herbal, fruit, grain, or mineral extracts. The Chinese also use acupuncture. By sticking very fine needles into the skin, they encourage the energy in the body to flow correctly, thus helping restore the natural harmony of the patient. Harmony with nature is very important in Chinese culture. Another way people explored this was through the building of beautiful gardens. Gardens were like artwork, a canvas on which master craftsmen would combine plants, flowers, water, and animals in order to make a place of perfect peace, tranquility, and harmony. Chinese writing.
A, B, C, D, E. Each letter of our alphabet has an equivalent sound. The combination of sounds makes a word. For example, if I say bird, you know that I'm talking about this. But in China, rather than write out the way a word sounds, they tried to capture the essence of the thing itself. If they wanted to write about a bird, they would use a few simple lines to make a picture of a bird. This type of writing is called pictograms. Pictograms do not represent sounds, but the object itself. For example, this would be a tree, this the sun, this the moon, and this a horse. Pictograms were first being used in China around 1500 BC. Over the centuries, these signs evolved. Though they didn't look as much like the objects they represented, each still represented the idea of the object. For example, the symbol for tree, used many times, means forest. That's what you call ideograms or ideograms. Chinese writing today has over 20,000 ideograms.
20,000? That sure is a lot of words to learn.
But Chinese writing isn't just about communication. It's also an art. The art of writing is called calligraphy. And Chinese calligraphy is a very appreciated art form, just as important as paintings. Famous and talented calligraphers would work to capture the essence and beauty of the Chinese symbols by painting them on rice paper.
Inventions.
No wonder we're lost. I'm telling you, that way is north.
No way. North is that direction. At least I think it is.
If it wasn't for the Chinese who invented the compass, something like this would have happened a lot. The first reference to a direction finder can be found in a Chinese book dating back to about 1040 AD. It contains a description of a magnetized needle on a piece of bamboo floating in a bowl of water. Metals that acquire the properties of a magnet always point towards the north. The Chinese also invented paper, and for a fast way of putting information on the paper, they invented a system of stamps and ink, making the first printing press. The Chinese can take credit for inventing all kinds of things, from kites to porcelain to the first calculator, called an abacus. They also invented gunpowder. This substance, made by combining saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal, was used at first to create beautiful fireworks. Not only were they beautiful, but they also believed fireworks scared away the bad spirits of the night. But perhaps one of the most famous discoveries came from worms.
Nobody knows how, but 5,000 years ago, the Chinese discovered that each one of us, just before becoming butterflies, makes a cocoon by rolling up a single, very fine thread that can measure up to 1 kilometer in length and weigh less than a gram.
Thank you very much, Mr. Worm. This thread was called silk. Chinese women would patiently unravel it and weave it into a light, soft, and very delicate material. The clothes made from silk were so special that a magical value was attached to them. The Chinese kept the process of making silk a secret for centuries. This meant that if you wanted silk, and everyone did, it had to come from China. The Silk Road. In the year 138 BC, the Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty sent an ambassador out to meet the peoples of the West. The ambassador went along with bodyguards and 100 Chinese merchants. It was a very long journey, but when the ambassador returned, the merchants brought the emperor incredibly valuable articles. These Western goods created a desire for the Chinese to begin trading with the peoples throughout Central Asia and Europe. Soon, this route the merchants took became very popular. People from all over gathered together in the oasis of Kashi. Merchants and artisans from many different cultures and countries would meet to exchange goods, an international marketplace. The Romans were so impressed by Chinese silk that they bought it at the price of gold. Because Chinese silk came to the rest of the world along this path, eventually the route would be known as the Silk Road. In the middle of the 13th century, in the midst of the Middle Ages, the world known by people in Europe did not stretch any farther than today's Middle East. The East seemed like a scary place, full of stories of monsters and dragons. Very few people in Europe traveled beyond the arid deserts of Arabia. But then came an adventurous traveler, a merchant from the city of Venice. His name was Marco Polo. He decided to set off on a very long journey to go all the way to the beginning of the Silk Road and then return home to Venice. Marco Polo ended up living 20 years in China and managed to have a very close relationship with the emperor himself. When he returned to Europe, he dictated a book that excited all Europeans. In it, he tried to describe the civilization that he had lived in for all that time. The fabulous things in his book seemed so unbelievable to Europeans that on his deathbed, Marco's family asked him if he was telling the truth about all the fabulous stories. Marco responded,
China is so vast and marvelous that I have only been able to recount half of what I actually experienced there.
What more can we learn if we dig a little deeper with our time compass? So what do you think was happening in the rest of Europe while Marco Polo was journeying through China? The Crusades were going on, where the powers of Western Europe and the Middle East were fighting for control of the areas around Jerusalem. The power of ancient Rome was declining, and Venice, another city in Italy, had become a great power. The Venetian Republic had ships that dominated territories from the Mediterranean to the Black Sea. Trade was very important to the Venetians.
So, Marco Polo went to China to trade?
Exactly. All the Venetian traders saw that the routes that extended towards the east were a source of amazing products. That's why Marco Polo, together with his uncle and father, ventured out to travel on the incredibly long route of the Silk Road, leading them to all their adventures in China.